scare you? And this is about thrillers. Did that bring you here or did that scare you away? Brought you here. Okay, excellent, excellent. And we have some eminent panelists out here, and we have a lot of interesting books written by them. I've kept a couple of those out here, but there are many more that they have written, and I'm sure you love those. Okay, the Berlin Wall. You heard of it? Many of you were not born then when the Berlin Wall got destructed. Okay, 79 Park Avenue. Must have heard of it. 221 Baker Street. Who hasn't heard of it? Okay, who has heard of it? Okay, you neither put your hand up for the first nor the second question. So, आपने either सुना होगा या ना सुना होगा. 221 Baker Street. Okay.
Was it 221 or was it 221B?
Okay, 221B. Now you've heard about it. Okay, great. Okay, Manhattan. सुना होगा? Hudson River. सुना होगा? Thames River. Okay, I pronounced it wrongly. Thames is the right spelling. Thames.
Yeah, Balaji, they will run away if you'll ask them so many questions. They are already getting so nervous.
They're already getting nervous. Don't get nervous. Relax. See, these are locations we constantly read about when we read Western novels, right? By Western authors, by American or UK-based authors, we read about these. We haven't visited these places, but we know about these from the books that we read. Now, why has India not featured in the backdrop? India is an exotic country, it's a lovely country, but till recently, we have not had India in the backdrop. It's only recently, okay? And that is what we are having as a discussion today. We have three eminent panelists. Now, my question to all the three panelists, and you can just sort of discuss it. While geographies even further east of India, like China and Vietnam, have featured as the backdrop in crime or thriller or whatever, but India has somehow, they've skipped over India and gone to those further east countries. What do you think has been the reason for those, in your opinion?
You want to take it?
Well, it could be, it also could be that you're speaking of non-Indian writers, of course, but non-Indian writers probably felt that India was such a difficult, exotic place that it required something of a very special plot in order to become credible. Of course, Indian writers have been writing about India, with India as a background. I mean, one doesn't have to go further than Rama Rao and R.K. Narayan and so on. But foreign writers, I think you're right, they have tended to go to Vietnam, to Singapore, of course.
China?
Yes, and Thailand, Laos also, but not India. But then, you have found perhaps some exceptions to this rule. I think Paul Theroux wrote a book about Calcutta. M.J. Carter wrote a book also about Calcutta, oddly enough. And Keating wrote several books about Mumbai, Bombay, without ever having been there. I think he only made one visit to India despite all these books. So perhaps you have some degree, perhaps faintly, of more interest in India as a location. But this doesn't rule out the fact that Indian novelists do use India very successfully as a background.
And that's exactly what the three of you have done. You have explored India.
I just want to add to that point, which is that as far as at least Western authors are concerned, I think there has been that challenge of feeling that this is unfamiliar territory. I think the two books that I wrote with James Patterson would probably not have happened had it not been for the fact that he was so anxious that how do I set a crime thriller based in India without really knowing too much about India, and which is probably the reason why that collaboration worked. So I think that has been an issue. But having said that, we are sitting in Kolkata, and if you really think about it, I mean, well before we started talking about crime thrillers in our age, we already had Satyajit Ray with Feluda and doing such a amazing job using the backdrop, that we are so familiar with. So I think it's already been done very well. The problem is that somewhere along the way, we became a little snooty about it, and we felt that we really don't need to develop our own brand of our own detectives, like our Miss Marples and our Agatha Christie, our Hercule Poirots and our Sherlock Holmes. And we were more interested in award-winning fiction, whereas this entire space, we almost ceded it in some ways to the Western authors.
Yeah, absolutely. Anuja, your views? You want to add to what Krishnan and...
No, I just feel that these are questions that don't really get caught up in too much, because I think, yeah, sure, the background's important. Where your story set is important. Your story is also important. And that's where I tend to keep the focus. So background is important, foreground is important, and I tend to be much more excited about that.
Yeah, coming to your book, Club You to Death. It's not only this backdrop or the streets of Delhi, but also the language in which you have portrayed it. It's English. It's also a little bit of Dil English, with dollops of, the Delhi parlance thrown in, like Ghanta, Yaar Wah Mere Sher, when he's talking about Rampalat, or he's talking about Phool Sa Ladka, if he talks about, Kashi and those things. Or you're referring to JNU out there. I mean, you don't have to expand, because nobody expands, as you correctly said. Nobody has to expand in Oxford University. So, it would have excited the Indian diaspora, apart from the people who are living in India, right? Did you tailor that for a specific audience? Because maybe even people in down south of India may not be able to connect with the lingo, but you already have a vast majority of readers in the north.
I think, if you see where my background is, I work in advertising. For 17 years full-time, I have serviced some of the biggest brands in the world. I have worked on PepsiCo brands, which is Pepsi, Kinley, Mountain Dew, 7-Up, Lay's, Nokia. These are the brands I've lived my whole life working on, like an entire existence, you could say, 17 years. And after that, I was bloody fed up of appeasing my international client and what they thought of and whether they would approve of it and so on. So for me, my fiction was very much my thing. I wasn't trying to appease anyone. I was like, this is how we are. Today, there are 1.4 billion Indians. So I'm saying that's more than enough for me. There was a lot of questions about whether this book will sell international rights and so on. I was like, I'm happy with the Desi rights. I'm happy with the Desi audience in a big way. And the chase was always, the quest was authenticity. This is how we talk. We are bilingual, we are trilingual, we are multilingual. When we fall in love, we switch to another language. When we get angry, we switch to another language. And I felt that my book had to be true to that, or whatever I was writing. So I was chasing that.
If you read the book, you'll get the very Delhi spice chart flavor. It is absolutely, it couldn't have been based in any other city apart from Delhi, and it captures it so well. You should check it out. Ashwin, one is the geography and the topography of India. The second is the Indic culture, okay, which is not confined to any geography. You have explored that very well in Magicians of Mazda. Ultimately, you come home to India, and I shall not reveal the end of the book. I'll leave it for you to read it yourself. You have taken it in a wider context. Can you explain that? How the story came, and did it start with the Indic thing, or did you? What was the start
actually,
point?
I must tell you, the idea for Magicians of Mazda was born from again, I must tell you the background, that 2014 or 15, Dan Brown had visited India. And then I was requested by his publishers to do a conversation with him at the NCPA in Bombay in 2015. So we sat on stage in front of an audience of about 1,000 odd people and talked about writing and mysteries and stuff which interested us. After that talk was over, he said, Ashwin, what are you doing for dinner? So I said, you got to be kidding me. Obviously I'm free if you ask. So we went for dinner and we spent another 3-4 hours yapping about stuff that was interesting. I was not expecting Dan to call me up the next morning, but he called up the next morning and said, if you had to take me to one place in Bombay that you think would excite me, then can you take me there? So I said, that's a tough one. Should I take you to Bombay's Masonic Lodge? So he said, nahin, been there, done that type of stuff. I said, okay, the first synagogue, the first church, and then eventually I could make out that he was not getting excited by it. I said, okay, fine, I'm just coming to pick you up and let's go. And we ended up going to the Tower of Silence, Dungarwadi, what is called, which is the final resting place of the Parsis, where the bodies are laid out in order to allow the vultures to eventually come and consume. And I could make out that he was utterly fascinated. We spent half an hour, 40 minutes there, and we had a senior Dastur who explained to us the workings of the place. But it struck me as the perfect setting for a crime. And I ended up incorporating that in one of the novels which I was writing at that time with James Patterson. It was a single chapter where a fight sequence happens in the middle of the night in the Tower of Silence. But I never thought that that would actually develop into a story on itself, in and by itself. And then, as it turns out, a few years later, I was sitting on a flight from Bombay to Delhi, and the person seated next to me was Boman Irani, the actor. And I said, look, I'm very interested in doing a thriller, but that thriller needs to have a Parsi context. So he said, well, frankly, there is already a pre-existing thriller, which is the Kissa-e Sanjan, which is the narrative of the 18,000 souls that arrived from Iran on the shores of Sanjan in 720 CE. So why don't you read that? And I ended up reading it. And once I read it, I realized, my God, there is not just a story, but there is also a story behind the story, which is where the mystery is. And that's how the mystery for Magicians of Mazda was born.
Wonderful. Krishnan sir, you have traveled widely. I mean, you've been a bureaucrat, you've been in foreign services. You could have picked any city in the world. What prompted you to pick Calcutta for this wonderful book of yours, which is The Ambassador and the Private Eye? The series of stories, by the way, একটু ফেলুদার টাইপের জিনিস, it's beautiful. অনেকগুলো গল্প আছে, একসঙ্গে পড়া যাবে এটা।
Well, thank you very much. I should firstly say that as a worst-selling author, I'm really very honored to be with the best-selling authors who are in my company today. But to answer your question, in fact, very few of my novels, in fact, only the last one, is in Calcutta, entirely in Calcutta. The other ones have been in far spread places, depending really on where I found some interesting people and interesting incidents. So I can hardly remember now, but the first was in southern Africa, where a consignment of weapons for the liberation movements, the anti-white apartheid liberation movements, was pinched. And it was pinched, this consignment was pinched and the weapons were used for a coup d'etat. Then my second one was in Libya, because Libya was then and has subsequently always been accused of making a nuclear bomb. And that I thought was interesting, and so that was basically about the Libyan bomb. And the third one was in Britain, London specifically, where 3 high commissioners, that's another word for ambassador, 3 ambassadors disappeared. And so that, and then the next one was in Sweden. And the one after that was mainly in Delhi and about an imminent war with Pakistan. So this last one, which Balaji has mentioned, is the only one which is entirely in Calcutta, and the only one which is not diplomatic or political. All my other novels have been political, and I write novels really to get away from my day job. So I write novels honestly, and this is sincerely true, for myself. So it doesn't really upset me too much to be a worst seller.
I don't know why you call. Sorry.
He's being utterly humble.
He's being very humble. He's a very humble man for all that he has achieved, just like our other panelists. I mean, they are very eminent, but they're very humble about what they've done. Now, a question more to do with marketing, and it's not that Indian crime fiction writers haven't been there. For example, I read this book called The Raja is Dead by Shivani Singh Bhattacharya. This was about some 12, 13 years ago. I don't know how much it sold. Now, is it a question of a foreign agent picking it up and giving it at scale in the international market? It is about the marketing firepower behind it. Do you think that matters somewhere? Yeah.
Should I?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, to a very great extent, Balaji, what happened actually was that if you just sort of rewind and go back, let's say 15 odd years, the time when I was starting out with my first novel, The Rosabal Line, that was 2007 or so. The truth is that the entire publishing industry was not looking out for the next crime thriller writer. They were looking out for the next award-winning writer. If you were a desi, then either you were straddling the literary ecosphere, as it were, or alternatively, then you were meant to be writing maybe a family saga, or possibly you could be writing a non-fiction title about how to make the best biryani. But you were certainly not expected to be writing thrillers. When I wrote The Rosabal Line and I pitched it as a theological thriller, they said, "Have you lost your marbles?" I mean, I wear it as a badge of honor that between literary agents and publishers, I was rejected 47 times during that period between 2007 and 2008. So the point I'm making is that to a very great extent, what has changed post that period of time is the fact that these publishing houses tasted success with Indian authors of the likes of Anuja. That is the change which happened, where suddenly now they saw that there were Indian authors who could dominate the bestseller lists.
Excellent.
So it's a bit of a catch-22. You can't create bestsellers without creating bestsellers.
Exactly.
But you are in very good company.
Excellent point.
Because I think you're neck and neck with J.K. Rowling, who was also rejected that many times before her first novel. And look where she is now.
So I must tell you, in those days between 2006, 2007, and where the letters were pouring in, or otherwise letters were not coming at all, I had on my study wall a bulletin board which had the numbers 12, 18, 33, 38, and people used to come and ask me, what are these numbers? And I said, well, 12 was the number of times that the first book of J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was rejected by publishers. And 18 was the number of times that I think Gone with the Wind was rejected. And 30 was the number of times that Stephen King's first novel, Carrie, was rejected. And 33 was the number of times that Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected. So I used to keep on psyching myself and say, hey, listen, I will eventually get published because I'm beating the pants off these guys. So it's a question of how you can really psych yourself to sort of plot through that.
It is quite motivating. I mean, in the sense, never give up. Yeah. Anuja, in crime fiction, when we read Western authors, there's either the Vietnam War or the Reaganomics or the Watergate or Cold War that has somewhere found the backdrop or the start point of a fiction somewhere. The Eye of the Needle, for example. Okay. In your book as well, and I shall not disclose what it is, I'll leave it for them to read it, there is a political incident that happened, an incident which happened, which proved to be the turning point of the whole story, and it surfaces in the climax of it. Now, for a fiction author, how does it happen? Is it an incident that triggers a story idea, or is it that while writing a story, you feel that yes, I can weave in this real life political incident? And I know it may happen differently in different books that you write, but just wanted your opinion.
I think what draws you to writing a book is some kind of inner turmoil, you know. There's a lot to be said for writing in a very still space, in a space where nothing is happening. So all the turmoil is inside your character's mind. And their issues are all internal. And it's like everything is going so well for you. Why are you so messed up? And why do you have all this trauma? So it's a quite outwardly, it's that whole thing of like that still pond and there's so much muck underneath and there's, you know, so much chaos underneath. So I think those are the two things that as writers we find sexy. You know, one is that everything is very still and the stuff bubbling below the surface. The other thing, there is insanity, chaos, all kinds of stuff, bombs exploding all over the place, all kinds of conflict, and your characters caught up in that. And both are equally exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would it be in your case, Ashwin? I mean, you met Burman Irani on a flight, and suddenly that sort of triggered off something that you could do more with the Parsi. I'm talking about Magicians of Mazda. You can talk about any other book of yours. That's fine.
No, it's always, you know, I would agree with Anuja that very often the lines between fact and fiction are very often blurred, but what causes what is really difficult to tell, because for me at least, most of my writing has always been triggered by something that I saw or something that I observed. The Rosabal line was triggered by a visit to a tomb in the heart of Srinagar, which is purportedly the resting place of Jesus Christ. And that became the obsessive story which then followed me for the next 2 years. Or for example, Chanakya's chant was triggered by a political event. I think it was the victory of UPA 2 in 2009. And they were taking a lot of time to form the government. And I began to wonder that if I go back 2,000 years, was politics always so messy? And so were the good old days really good? And that became a political thriller to talk about the old versus the new. Or if I take, for example, let's say a book like Keepers of the Kal Chakra, it was triggered by a nightmare where I felt that the nightmare was so real that I felt that that is my real life, whereas my normal life is probably my dream. So that took me into an exploration of quantum theory. So it's very often that something will sort of trigger something else, and then later on, there are people who come back to me on social media and say, were you actually in some way prophesying about something? I said, no, because it probably started from a real world event, and now my fiction has turned out to be real.
Excellent. Sir, it is not Stockholm, but Uppsala in Sweden. And I'm being very honest, I have not heard about the place. I was not aware of the place, right? To shift from a big, obvious city, the city that everyone knows about, to shift from there and get it into a small town. How does a writer feel confident about it? Because somewhere he might lose the connect with the audience, with the readers, saying that, hey, I don't know about this town, so why should I be bothered about it? But you feel strongly for the place. Maybe you've traveled there. Maybe you've lived there. Can you reflect upon this? Whether it actually...
You're asking why
why did you choose
the micro rather than the macro?
Yeah, the small picture rather than the big picture.
Yeah, well, that's because, honestly, I'm much more interested in people than places. For me, you may say that these are thrillers. I don't think my books are thrillers, actually. I think they're more... they are people where you have an anti-hero rather than a hero. You have people who have constant doubts and who are internally conflicted. To me, that's much more interesting than the broad landscape, fist fights, shootouts. I find that much, much less interesting, honestly. Two of my books deal with the Naxalite movement to some extent. The Naxalite movement was an extremely a powerful backdrop in Bengal some years ago, much diminished now. But there were, even in those books, no great elements of torture or murder or mayhem. It was more about people who were caught up in these things who became tremendously conflicted. So to answer your question, it doesn't really matter to me terribly much whether a person is in Stockholm or Uppsala or Gothenburg or Malmö, wherever. The atmosphere of the country is important, yes, but it could be anywhere in that country.
It could be, for example, it is not, even in Calcutta, for this, the ambassador in the private, it's not
Yes.
Taj Bengal or Oberoi or
No,
Park Hotel.
No,
It is a small place called Waizol near
Yes.
Purnodash Road in South Calcutta.
yes.
It gets as micro as that. You're a South Calcutta person, am I right? Can I hazard
Well,
a guess?
I'm not a Bengali at all, but I live in South Calcutta, yes, at the moment. So anyway, yes, but I wouldn't like to think that my horizon was limited to South Calcutta.
Of course not.
I hope not.
No, of
Yeah,
course
but
not.
The Wise Owl has an interesting
Oh, yes.
appearance in this story, because it's not the only book in which the Wise Owl appears. It seems to me a perfect place for a reticent anti-hero who's in all my books. He's actually a Somali former diplomat. And so that makes me able to introduce some racial questions. And he's also not a young man, he's a very senior entity like me. And so he is, let us say, not the swashbuckling hero of the movies. Although my last book actually is, in a way, a love affair. But that's much more important to me than the actual plots that are going on. But the Wise Owl has an interesting background for me, because it is it's a place that you can pass by 1,000,000 times without ever going in or being even noticing it. But you remember, perhaps some of you have seen Kahani with the wonderful Vidya Balan, and she lives in a guest house called
Mona Lisa Guest House.
Mona Lisa on Charat Bose Road. And whenever I pass there, I always think of Kahani and Vidya Balan. But the Wise Owl, I thought, would be quite interested in the fact that someone was writing about the Wise Owl and what happens in the Wise Owl. So after my second book, I think I rang up the owner of the Wise Owl and said, look, do you happen to know, have you ever heard of this book? He hadn't, of course. And I said, I've written it, and I've written about your pension, whatever you call it, boarding house. And I said that I'd be delighted to come over, give you a copy of the book, and have a chat about it if you want. Well, he never called me back. So that put me down, of course, but it wasn't going to be like Mona Lisa, obviously. But anyway, that shows you to some extent the degree to which, people are interested in promotion in fiction, and secondly, how insignificant he thought I was.
My prophecy is that the book will get made into a series, okay, for the OTT platform or even a theatrical release, and Wiseall will become the next Mona Lisa.
That will be the day.
Yeah. Anuja, coming to on the same topic, it's every fiction writer's, I wouldn't say dream, but an ambition or whatever, to see the book turned into a film or a web series. Where is Club You to Death on that? Kuch ho raha hai?
Club You to Death was had quite an exciting little swimmer in 2021, which is when it came out, and finally the rights went to Maddock Films, and the movie is being shot starting very soon in February, and Homi Ajania is directing, Maddock Pictures is producing. There is a very exciting cast, which I'm not at liberty to disclose over here, but I'm really excited about it. So
Excellent.
that happened. And no, I mean, just listening to what everyone said, I think that nobody can afford to ignore the political anymore. So the personal is the political. Yeah, sure, it's a very micro story. It's about you, your character. But where your character stands in the state of the world and conversations every day is also really important. I have grown-up daughters now, and they say that while they're on Hinge or Tinder or wherever, if someone says they have moderate political views, they just swipe left. They're like, no, this is not. It's somehow very important. I think when you meet new people, you're looking for common ground, something you can talk about, whether it's the books you've read or the movements that are close to you or dear to you or your ideals. It's all gotten really mixed. So we can keep saying that, yeah, this is not to do with that, but everything is connected to everything. More and more I find that makes it so interesting as writers for us, to find that that we get to feature in a small way on something like Hinge or Tinder or Grindr, where people are bonding over their favorite writers and their favorite political beliefs, perhaps, and we feature there.
So at the premiere, please consider me if you want to give me a pass, a guest invite for that. Please, I'd be very happy to attend the premiere of your movie. Ashwin, if one were to make a movie on Magicians of Mazda, and I'm sure they'd love to do it, Udwada, Sanjan, Diu, Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, or Abpada Market in Islamabad, they would have to go to all these places. Did you, while writing this story, did you actually visit these places? Tell us a little bit about the traveler in the author.
The nature of travel will vary across my books, actually. Now, specifically, for example, if I was to take, there are some books in which travel takes a bit of a backseat and the research is of other forms. Like, for example, if I was to look at a book like Chanakya's Chant, that was a book where the only thing that I did was multiple readings of the Arthashastra and the Mudra Rakshas, which became the basis for developing the story. But a book like the Krishna Key, I ended up going to places like Dwarka and Mathura and Vrindavan and Bet Dwarka and so on and so forth, because visiting those locations was critical to being able to develop the story. The same thing happened with, for example, the Vault of Vishnu, where I ended up doing 2 trips into China in order to be able to sort of frame that story. The Magicians of Mazda, I had already completed the entire Parsi circuit in India before the pandemic struck. So I'd already covered Surat, Navsari, Sanjan, Udwada, Diu, all of these places I'd already done. The only big issue that was pending was my visit into Iran, which got cancelled because of the pandemic. Yeah. But luckily, we are also living in a world where very often, Muhammad doesn't need to go to the mountain. Very often, you can bring the mountain to you. So nowadays, for example, we have virtual 3D travel. When I was doing the research into Persepolis, I was surprised with the amount of 3D material that was already available to me, where I could virtually tour into places like Persepolis. And of course, then having interviews with people who know the law of the land and the lay of the land is that much more important. So you find ways to compensate. I know of many thriller writers who've set novels in places that they haven't even been into. So I think it's different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely. Somehow, Hussain Zaidi's novels, like your stories like Black Friday or even the one Gangubai Kathiawadi, they've been made into movies. So I think it's high time we also looked at Indian crime fiction writers, not just non-fiction ones. And I think, as you correctly said, it takes a bestseller to make a bestseller. It takes an idea to generate more ideas out of that. I think definitely, it's coming down to that. They say that in every fiction, there is an autobiographical element. There is one character which is similar to the author or resembles the author. In your case, would it be Michael Marco, Krishnan? Would I be right in saying that?
Well, I think it has to be. But I think that my colleagues would agree with me that all characters are composite and they're never, starkly based on a particular person. But Michael Marco is a constant theme throughout my novels. He's in every one of them. He's an anti-hero, an old rather world-weary Somali. I suppose it's hard for me to find any distinct resemblance between him and me, but I would say that I did know such a person. When I was in South Africa, there was such a person, a Somali ambassador. He was responsible for sending weapons to the liberation movements at that time. He struck me as being, he wasn't a career diplomat, he was a so-called political appointee, and he had fallen out with his government, so that made it rather curious. Mostly favorites of the government tend to be appointed as ambassadors, but this man had actually fallen out with his president and he was got rid of, so to say. But then he struck me as being so interesting because he had a completely different view of Southern Africa to my other colleagues, the other ambassadors there. So this person stuck in my mind, and I made him a fictional character. So whether he's like me or not, actually you can't expect an author to give an answer to that. It's only the reader that can, or the person who knows you that can give an answer to that, whether the person is like you or not. I don't know whether you would agree with that. The female characters in your novels, I mean, are they like you?
Say Kuki Katoch or Roshni Agarwal or Urvashi Dogra.
Yeah, I think we are all guilty of that. You know, very often there is stuff, not just female characters, male characters, any characters. Anyone who, if there's something that you're bursting to say, and some belief that is very dear to you, you will find a character and you'll put it in the mouth. You know, we do that because that's a thought that's close to us. Of course, the most important thing, writing-wise, I think research also, whatever you do. Sure, you can go to places and you can look at the 3D displays and you can wander and, you know, try and do it that way. But the first-person account, the empathy, that's the most important thing, right? So whether you're having hot chocolate or you're having alcohol or you're just sharing golgappas, but you sit down with someone, you have that conversation, you get to that place where they were, somebody who's actually lived a particular experience. And I think that's even, not just as a writer, but even as a person, your growth comes from that, from growing your empathy muscle and figuring out that, yeah, sure, this person, as me, myself, I may have a very diametrically opposite view to what this person feels. But if I sit with them and I talk to them and I'll walk in their shoes and I get into their mind, I'll come to a point where I'll say, yeah, she has a point. She's right. He's right. You know, and so you can then see that opposing point of view very, very clearly. And when you can, then you can write about it with authority.
Excellent. Were you Jim Dastur, Ashwin?
No, not by a mile. My characters generally tend to be based on an amalgam of real life characters. I mean, by way of example, let me take a book like Chanakya's Chant. Now, Chanakya's Chant, there are two parallel stories, one set 2300 years ago in the times of Chanakya, and one parallel story which is in the present day. And there is a modern day version of a Chanakya, which is a character called Gangasagar Mishra. Now, people don't realize that when this book was written in 2009, well before the advent of the Narendra Modi-Amit Shah duo onto the political scene, and people come on social media and they say, oh, were you writing about Amit Shah? And the truth is that at that time, I had looked at various politicians of various hues. I had looked at people like Mayawati. I had looked at people like Narasimha Rao. I had looked at people like Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And actually, I had drawn various character traits from them and then mixed them all up, made this one royal scrambled eggs of those characters and planted them into Pandit Gangasagar Mishra. So for me, it's never autobiographical. If at all there is any element of me, it is a character that I would aspire to be, not necessarily what I am.
Excellent point, Ashwin. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you write characters that is there, or sometimes you want to write what you aspire to be. Excellent. At this point, maybe I could turn it to the audience for a few questions. The gentleman in the black jersey, and I think we'll start with you, and then we'll come to you. Do we have the microphones out here, please?
afternoon, sir. So my question is, nowadays readers are exposed to many mediums of crime fiction, like many yes foreign authors are being translated to this country. So how difficult it is to deliver elements of twists and surprises to readers who are explored to all kinds of twists in fiction these days. And my second question is there a possibility of development of subgenres in Indian thrillers, like we have in America, medical thrillers, Robin Cook, legal thrillers, John Grisham? Is there a possibility of that happening in India?
Is that for me? Or- Anuja, you want to take it? Would you like to take that question? So let me answer the second part of it first. It's a two-part question. So the second part was, do you think that there is likely to be more subgenres within the main genre? And I think that is already happening. So if you really think about it, today you already have crime thrillers, which are simply a crime has happened and you're trying to figure out as to how it happened and what was the story behind the crime. There are people like me who are doing mythological thrillers and theological thrillers. I know for a fact that there is now a budding lot of young writers who are doing horror thrillers. I believe that the scope exists for many, many more subgenres like legal thrillers, medical thrillers, and so on and so forth. It's just that our evolution in the thriller space, as I mentioned earlier, was stunted because of the fact that publishers wanted to promote their frontlist authors from the West till about 10 or 15 years ago. So in that sense, it's taken a while for us to even bring in just thrillers. As we will go along, you'll find more and more specialization happening. So that is the second part of your question. The first part of your question, I'm sorry, I lost you. I forgot it.
I was saying that since readers are exposed to so many types of twists and turns from foreign authors and
Yeah.
Indian authors these days, how difficult it is to deliver that element of surprise in your
Yeah.
books? Currently?
I think at least as far as what I attempt to do is I try and take my character and paint the character into an absolutely impossible situation. I really attempt to paint myself into a corner, that there is no possibility of return from this. And then how would that person deal with that situation? And I think you've actually hit the nail on the head when it comes down to thrillers, frankly. You can have a dime a dozen great editors who will give you the right language and the right words and the right vocabulary and what have you. But ultimately, either you can tell a great story or you can't. And a thriller means that every couple of pages should end on a hook, which propels you into your next chapter. So, I mean, the biggest challenge for a thriller writer, or for that matter, any fiction writer, is how do you get your reader to turn the page?
Any other views on this, Krishnan, Anuja? Very good question, actually.
I think we're all combating the AI and the chat GPT. That's something we all worried about. Yeah, we got to get out of business soon. So eventually, like, it's got to be about the character. You know, you put them, the clue will come from there. They'll show the way. It's like when you do animation, you talk about wireframes. You create something, a 3D model. And then you say, ye banda aisa hai. These are his flaws. These are his weaknesses. These are her dreams. These are her nightmares. These are insecurities. And once you've built a proper, comprehensive 3D character, when an impossible situation hits it, or, you know, like a iceberg hits it, you know how this person will react. And because you've made that person, you know how that person will react. And that's where the genuine surprise comes, rather than the formulaic surprise. So I think that's what we try to do.
Your views? Okay. We'll go to the next question, please, gentlemen. Yes, sir.
My question is what Ashwin said about that the growth of thrillers has been stunted in India. Oh, sorry. Has been stunted in India sort of till now. The question is now a lot of subgenres are happening, more and more thriller authors. Is it possible in the Indian scenario to get a local characteristic. If you see the Scandinavian thrillers or the Japanese thrillers, those kind of authors, there's a local flavor, local characteristic. Whereas the Indian writing, obviously there are exceptions, but still it's more the Americanized thing transposed to an Indian context. So more that localized kind of flavor, more in a homogeneous flavor. Do you foresee that happening in the Indian scenario? And is it a little bit of the marketing point was raised earlier? What the Scandinavian authors, Stig Larsson was a first, but after that there has been a flow, or the Japanese authors. So do we foresee something like that happening in India?
Okay. Can I just, I think that as readers, we are, so I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. But I think as readers, now we also like to show that we are very well read. So we'll say, oh, this is just like Stieg Larsson. Oh, this is so derivative Agatha Christie. Oh, this is like Father Brown. Now, because we also have to show that we have read. And so we know many detectives and we know many genres. And so we'll say, ye to ye hai. And we do that not just in books, we do that in movies, everywhere, we're all doing it. Today Pathan is coming out, you see the reviews of Pathan. Everyone will say, oh, he's trying to do like a Tony Stark. Because I have to show I've seen Tony Stark. See, I'm a well-traveled person, I've traveled to many countries, I get all the references, right? So I think like, come on, yeah, cut us a little slack, yeah. I mean, we are trying to write desi thrillers only, no. When I set an ACP Bhavani in Delhi crime branch, then that's what I'm trying to do. That is what I'm trying to do. And I feel that as Indians, maybe it's our low self-esteem or whatever, we always feel damn defensive about ourselves, and it's high time we got out of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great, very good question. If you read these books, I can tell you about it. It's got a very, very local flavor. And I'm talking about all the three books. This one, Anuja's book is set in Delhi. And even Ashwin's book, when it... You've read it? Excellent.
So can I do a bit of a marketing pitch?
Sure.
Besharam hu main.
Sure,
Besharam hu main. This year, later part of the year, I will be coming out with a book which is outside of my Bharat series. And that is a book which is a crime thriller with a detective, which is going to then, that character will come across in multiple books within that series. And the one thing that I have really made a humongous effort to do is not to go in the direction of what we are used to with, let's say, CSI, or because the entire methodology, the entire environment, the entire resources that are available towards crime solving in this country tend to be very, very different. So, for example, when I was writing Private Delhi along with James, I went into a morgue for the very first time in Bombay in Cooper Hospital. And, I had never seen an overflowing morgue before that. But I wanted to get a sense of what it feels like, because it's not going to be stark and pristine the way you have been exposed to in, let's say, American crime settings. And I remember, there were trolleys, there were gurneys, even in the passages. And I walked in, and then I wanted to go into the post-mortem room. Luckily, a friend of mine from the police force had put in a word, and I was able to meet the medical examiner. And he gave me one large steel dabba in my hand. And I said, what is this? He said, it's Vicks Vapor Rub. Put it under your nose, because otherwise you'll not be able to stand here. So those are, I think, as we will evolve as crime writers, as thriller writers, we will also do the necessary research in order to be able to bring you stories which haven't been simply inspired by something that we saw in the West. I think that change, that transformation is already happening.
Excellent, excellent. Krishnan,
I think it's very difficult to do an autopsy on your own novels. And therefore, I find it personally very difficult to speak about my novels. I think if any author is going to say to himself, herself, that I'm going to create a character that's going to live through the ages, I think that's that's a fool's paradise. It's not really up to you to do that. I can't believe that when Conan Doyle started writing that he thought that Sherlock Holmes would capture people's imagination. He created a character, the character lived, and that was fortunate for him. Now, in my book, the latest one, I firmly believe that India is a very difficult place for women. That for me is a article of faith. So my main character, apart from the Somali old gentleman, my main character is a youngish ex-police woman who's been retired from the police. She has a artificial arm, and she rides a Harley Davidson. And she is everything that the anti-hero is not. She's energetic, she's attractive, she's a go-getter. Whether that character is going to continue to live or not, I don't know. While I was writing it, she was living for me. And I think we would all agree probably that our characters actually live for the time when we're writing them. Whether they're going to have a life after your book is something no one can predict. Hopefully, but it may never happen.
But Ashwin, congratulations on your new series coming out. Really, really looking forward to it. I'm sure, and I speak for everyone out here. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, this lady in the black t-shirt and then the gentleman in the cream one. Yeah, we'll go that way.
If you can hear me.
No, the other mic is there.
Hello. Yeah. So my question is for all three of you or whoever want to answer it. I have a lot of questions, but this is, I feel, the most important for me. So usually when I read a crime novel or a thriller novel, I see some parts, if not all, there are some parts that are gorish and some parts that are disturbing that as a writer, you might not have always experienced or like you're not that person who you're writing about. Does that take some toll on your psyche, or how do you process yourself getting to that point, writing about it with full truth and honesty, and then come out of it? Like, do you need a little bit of rest? Does it tax you, or is it very easy? Like, can you present yourself as an omnipresent observer and just see it and then produce it in your writing? That's all, for all three of you.
Okay.
No, I think as you dig into your stories and do the research for your stories, at least there have been moments where I have felt very, very disturbed by, when I was writing a book called Chanakya's Chant, I had several chapters which were based out of a police station. And in order to write those chapters, I actually had to go and meet a couple of those officers. So one of them showed me this rubber pipe, a black rubber pipe, and it was about roughly 2 feet or 3 feet long. And I asked him, what is this? And he said, we call this in our lingo, we call it a Samaj Sudharak. So I said, what is that? He said, well, we can hit you with this, but there will be no visible injuries. It'll hurt like hell, but there will be no visible injuries. And then he let me in on many of those sort of secrets. And then it's all great. You are feeling at that time really charged up that, oh, wow, I have something more to add for my masala. But then later on, when you reflect on it, you say, oh, my God, this is scary. So there is just no way that if you are really trying to be true to real life, that there aren't bound to be times when you get affected.
This young man, if you can ask your question in 10 seconds, because we are out of time, okay? Or we can take your question offline, if it's okay with you.
Either way is fine with me. Offline is also okay.
Offline is fine, okay? So, we are at the top of the hour. India is the best place to be, and thriller comes home to India finally, thanks to authors like we have on the panel today, and more thrills, more thrillers, more books, more India. Thank you very much.